You know it's a major test when it calls for something significant in your life and at the very same time makes absolutely no sense at all.
When spiritual challenges like that come along, Dr. Tony Evans says we need to put what we really believe into action.
It's your life, not your lips. It's your walk, not your talk. Faith is measured by movement. If there is no movement, there is no faith, no matter how faith-ish you feel.
This is The Alternative with Dr. Tony Evans, author, speaker, senior pastor of Oak Cliff Bible Fellowship in Dallas, Texas, and president of the Urban Alternative. Part of being in school is knowing there's always a test around the corner. Well, today, Dr. Evans explains that the same is true in the Christian life. Let's turn to Hebrews 11:17 as he helps us get ready.
And by faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. And he who had received the promises was offering up his only begotten son. It was he to whom it was said, in Isaac your descendants shall be called. He considered that God is able to raise people even from the dead, from which he also received him back as a type. All of us, as we came through school, had to face tests. The teacher gave us tests to see if we really heard what they taught, whether we really knew the information that had been given. So they gave us a test. Some of those tests came as pop quizzes, little short exams that were unexpected, unannounced. And the idea of a pop quiz was to make sure you were always ready for a test. But then there were the whoppers, the midterms and the finals. Those were the big tests. They typically carried more weight than the pop quizzes because they were typically more extensive in the nature of the testing. Those tests were critical, and us passing them to moving to the next grade level. If you failed them enough, you would have to repeat the grade all over again because you were not yet able to pass the test. But when you passed the test, you could then move up to a new level of testing. You went from this grade test to that grade test, but at a higher level because now you were in a higher grade. When God is ready to give you a new level of experience with him, it comes with a test. So today we want to look at the test of faith, Abraham's final exam. The author of Hebrews tells us that it came when God asked Abraham to offer up Isaac, which took place in Genesis chapter 22. So what he talks about in Hebrews 11 actually took place in Genesis 22, this final exam. He is told to offer up Isaac, who was the promise. You know it's a major test when it calls for something significant in your life and at the very same time makes absolutely no sense at all. He says to Abraham in Genesis chapter 22, now it came about, verse 1, after these things that God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he said, here I am. And he said, take now your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on the mountain of which I will tell you. That made no sense. Let me show you why. Because it is full of contradictions. Theological contradiction, number one. I made a promise that through you, I'm going to birth a nation via your son Isaac. Now kill him. But Isaac is a teenager. He's not married. He has no children. You told me through him, you're going to build a whole nation and affect the whole world. How can he the extension of the lineage that you promised if I kill him. It's a contradiction. When God is giving you a major exam, it makes no sense. It looks like God is contradicting himself. Not only was it a theological contradiction, it was a biblical contradiction, because in Genesis chapter 9, God condemns murder. He says you cannot take the life of another person. Yet he just told Abraham to take the life of his son. So God not only has contradicted his promise, he's contradicted his whole biblical teaching. God, right now, what you're asking doesn't make sense. Not only was it a biblical contradiction and a theological contradiction, it was an emotional contradiction. Because he says, take your son whom you love, your only son through Sarah, and I want you to take him and sacrifice him. I love this boy. I've waited 100 years for this boy. You're asking me to give up the thing I love most? Watch this. You're asking me to give up the very thing you bless me with. That's a pull on the heartstring that you can't explain. God, that doesn't make sense. Not only was it a theological contradiction, a biblical contradiction, an emotional contradiction, it was a relational contradiction. How are we going to explain this to Sarah, your baby mama? How are we going to explain to Sarah, I'm getting ready to take our son out and slay him because that's what God told me? Now you know why it says Abraham got up early in the morning. He had to get up before Sarah got up so he wouldn't have to explain any of this. Worst of all, maybe, it was a spiritual contradiction, because God tells him, take Isaac, slay him, and worship me. If there was ever a day you don't feel like going to church, this is the day. Because how do you worship God with a broken heart? How do you worship God when God is doing a number on you? How do you worship God when he has disappointed you? How do you worship God and go to the altar when you believe he has failed you? God, how do I go to church today? But it says Abraham got up. There's another thing you need to observe. It says, get up and go to the mountain, to the place I will show you. He had to obey without all the details. God didn't give him all the information. He says, after you get up and after you get to the mountain, then I'll show you the spot I want you to go to. But I'm not going to give you all the details up front. I will only give you more details when I see you moving. See, one of the reasons that we do not see more details from God is he can't get us to move from where we are. Because remember, faith is acting like God is telling the truth. Faith is defined by your foot movement, not by your feelings. It's your life, not your lips. It's your walk, not your talk. Faith is measured by movement. If there is no movement, there is no faith, no matter how faith-ish you feel. So it says Abraham got up, and now the plot thickens. When he gets up, I want you to keep this verse in mind, verse 4. I'm just going to read it right now. We're going to pick it up in a minute. Verse 4 says, on the third day, Abraham raised his eyes and saw the place from a distance. He tells the young men, the servants who help carry the load, y'all stay here. I and the lad will go up and we will worship and return to you. Well, wait a minute now. God just told you to kill him. Y'all stay here. I'm going up here. Take care of what God told me to do, and when I finish what God told me to do, me and the boy will see you afterwards. But God told you to kill him. So what you mean, we coming back to see you afterwards? See, when you're called to faith, you got to speak the truth in the midst of the contradiction of the circumstance. Hebrews 11 says, The reason he said that was because he believed God was even able to raise the dead. That's what Hebrews 11 says. So if I obey you, God, and do what you told me to do, and at the same time believe your promise that you're going to work through Isaac to make a great nation, then I also have to believe, since you don't contradict yourself, that if I do what you tell me to do, you got some kind of miracle you're planning to bring me and this boy back here again. But what made him speak that? Where did this faith confidence come that God could raise the dead? Well, you recall, Sarah's womb was dead. And Abraham couldn't function no more at 100 years old. And God created a hookup. And the miracle baby of Isaac was born. He had seen what God could do in raising a womb. So he figured the same God could raise a son. So when God calls you to a major exam, don't forget what he did in the quizzes. Don't forget what he did yesterday when he moves you to a bigger challenge tomorrow. Because if it's bigger today than what he did yesterday, is because he's moving you to a new grade level, a higher experience with him.
Dr. Evans will come back in a moment with the turning point in Abraham's story as he continues this message from his current series, Heroes of the Faith. This 12-lesson collection explores what it's like to really live out the conviction that God can be trusted as we make the discovery that real faith is more than a matter of just what we believe. Find out how ordinary people like you and me can live extraordinary lives by doing exactly what some of the most famous characters in the Bible did. Act as though God is telling the truth. Now, if you've been following our broadcast, you know that for a limited time, we're offering this giant 2-volume series on CD as our gift when you help us keep Tony's teaching on this station by making a contribution of any amount. So don't miss out. Visit us today at tonyevans.org, make your contribution, and let us send you Heroes of the Faith. Again, that's tonyevans.org. Or call us day or night at 1-800-800-3222 and let one of our resource team members help you. We'll come back with part 2 of today's lesson right after this.
Coming up April 17th through the 20th, the Urban Alternative is hosting a pair of conferences that can change your church and the community you serve. The first is the Kingdom Agenda Leadership Expo, designed for your church's entire ministry team. It features a special track on how to implement the revolutionary Adopt a School program developed by Dr. Evans, along with real-world answers and insights from members of his leadership team in areas like children's ministry, worship, media, administration, and many more.
It is going to be a powerful time of training, equipping, challenging, and fellowshipping for everyone who has a responsibility in the local church to equip you for more impactful ministry in your church and to your community.
The expo is followed by the Kingdom Agenda Pastors Summit, just for senior or assistant pastors and their wives. You'll spend time with Tony and his wife Lois and enjoy powerful teaching from Jeffrey Johnson of the Eastern Star Church and Mark Bailey of Dallas Theological Seminary.
You'll be encouraged, you'll be motivated, and you'll be sent out to do what God's already called you to do and be faithful doing it.
The Kingdom Agenda Leadership Expo is coming up April 17th and 18th, followed immediately by the Pastors Summit from the 18th through the 20th. Space is limited, so don't wait. Get the details and make your reservation today by visiting tonyevans.org or call us at 1-800-800-3222.
They make their way to the place that God said. So Abraham now is talking to Isaac. Isaac says to his father, my father, verse 7 of Genesis 22, here I am, my son. He said, behold, I see the fire, I see the wood, but I don't see the lamb. Every other time we went to church, we had a sacrifice. But today, you ain't bring a lamb. What's up, Dad? Dad looks at his son, can't say anything. He can't say, you the lamb. Because it's hard for a man over 100 years old to chase a teenager running away. Because I don't know about you, but I'd be up out of here. Catch me, Dad, if you can. Does my middle name look like lamb to you? Right? You know what he says? He says, son, God's got to fix this one. The Lord will provide himself, because I don't have an answer for you. I don't know how this is going to work out. And when God puts you in a final exam, you don't know how this is going to work out. God has got to do something here, because only God has an answer to this dilemma of faith that I'm in. Because this is a midterm or a final. This is not a little pop quiz, and it's confusing. And God's got to provide the solution. And so he takes his son up. He puts him on the altar. Verse 9, he built an altar, arranged the wood, bound his son Isaac, and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Can you imagine what he's thinking, feeling? And Abraham stretched out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. Because guess what? That was what he was told to do. Verse 11, but the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, that's Jesus in the Old Testament, the angel of the Lord, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, here I am. Do not, verse 12, stretch your hand out against the lad and do nothing to him. For now I know you fear me, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. I don't know about you, but you should be having a problem right now, and it ought to be a theological problem, because God says, now I know. Oh, wait a minute, you God. You're omniscient. Omniscient means all-knowing. You already knew what I would do, because you're God. You know yesterday, you know today, and you got prophecy down. You know tomorrow. He says, now I know, as though I didn't know before. I'm knowing it now. And I only know it now because of what you just did. So how do we theologically bring together the concept of an all-knowing God and a not knowing something till now? How does that work? While God knows everything actual and everything potential, he does not know everything experiential. For example, if you were to ask God, what does it feel like to commit a sin? I suggest to you he couldn't answer that question, because he's never done it. Now, he's never committed a sin. So if you ask him, what does it feel like to do it? Does he know what sin is? Yes. Does he know what sin can do? Yes. He can give you all the information. What he can't give you is the experience. Now, he can tell you what it feels like to die for your sin, my sin, through Jesus Christ, but he can't tell you what it feels like to do it himself, because that's not been part of his experience. So while God knows everything, he hasn't experienced everything he knows. The reason why God became a man in the person of Jesus Christ, so he could sympathize with our weaknesses, so he could feel what we go through. The Father knows what you go through. Jesus can feel it. So Jesus the Son can explain to God the Father, who already knows the information, what the information feels like, because he became a man. So what then is being said to Abraham at this moment? He is saying, Abraham, now I know you love me because I see it and feel it. In other words, you have now given me the experience of your love, not merely the verbalization of it. We come to church and we say, I love you, I love you, I love you, Lord, today. We express it, we sing it, we repeat it, we say it, and God comes back saying, I want a love I can feel. He wants to feel it. And what makes God feel it, that is, know it experientially and not just informationally, is when we choose him over the thing we love most. Sacrifice your son, the son whom you love, your only begotten son. Do you love me more than him? That's a final exam. When God calls forth a faith act of love so he can feel it. Now I know. Oh yeah, informationally, yes. Intellectually, yeah. But today I feel your love. And I feel it because of your choice of me over the thing you love most in life. Talking about the test of faith, and we're not talking about a pop quiz now. We're talking about a final exam. Now I know. And there we have it. Watch this. Then Abraham raised his eyes and looked, verse 13, and behold, behind him a ram caught in the thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up for a burnt offering in place of his son. And Abraham called the name of the place Jehovah Jireh. The Lord will provide, as it is said to this day, in the mount of the Lord it will be provided. That's one of the great names of God in Scripture, Jehovah Jireh. The Bible uses Abraham in James 2 when it talks about faith. And in James 2 when it talks about faith, it says, by faith Abraham was justified by works when he offered up Isaac, and he was called a friend of God because he was willing to believe God against the backdrop of the ridiculous. God says to him, verse 15 of Genesis 22, then the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, by myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this thing and have not withheld your son, your only son. Indeed, I will greatly bless you. I will greatly multiply your seed as the stars of heaven and as the sand which is on the seashore, and your seed shall possess the gate of their enemies. In your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. He says, Abraham, I got it now. I got it. Because you've obeyed my voice in the final, in this tough thing I've asked you to do, I got it from here. I'm going to swear by it. The good news here is that Abraham has had failures in his past. He's blown it a few times over these 25 plus years. God just gave him retesting. Some of us are here today, and we've been retesting and retesting and retesting and retesting and retesting. God says, I'll wait till you pass, because I want to give you an experience with me. You want the provision. I want the experience. Give me the experience of your commitment, and I'll show you what I can do with rams caught in the thicket, waiting to move when I tell it to.
Dr. Evans will come back in a moment with a final challenge to wrap up today's program. First, though, if you'd like to get a copy of today's message to review on your own or share with someone else, the title to ask about is Abraham, the Test of Faith. You can request it as a standalone message or as a part of Dr. Evans' 2-volume set, Heroes of the Faith. Yours right now is our thank you gift for a contribution of any amount to keep this listener-supported program coming your way. Remember, this limited-time offer won't last long, so make a point of visiting us today at tonyevans.org to make the arrangements. Again, that's tonyevans.org. Or call our Resource Center at 1-800-800-3222 and let one of our team members help you. 1-800-800-3222. It's smart to make plans to protect the assets you want to pass on to your children. But on Monday, Dr. Evans talks about the most important inheritance you can possibly leave behind. Right now, though, he's back with a thought that deserves some serious consideration.
What is your Isaac? That thing that God can't have because you're too attached to it. Is it your money? Is it the relationship? Is it the career? Is it the skill? Is it the opportunity? What is it that is your Isaac? And God says, bring it here.
The Alternative with Dr. Tony Evans is brought to you by the Urban Alternative and is made possible by the generous contributions of listeners like you.